Clara Bennett's fingers trembled slightly as she reviewed the estate papers in her husband's office. Alexander sat across from her, immaculately dressed as always, with a polite but cold expression. "Clara," he began smoothly, "the Bennett estate is complicated. You understand that, don't you?" Clara's jaw tightened. She did understand. And she knew exactly what he was doing. Alexander's casual tone hid his true intent, to keep her from her rightful inheritance, under the pretense of family interests. "I understand perfectly," Clara replied evenly. "Which is why I won't let anyone, including you, stand in my way." Alexander raised an eyebrow, his amusement barely concealed. "You're overreacting. I'm only thinking of the estate's longevity. Your impulsiveness could be detrimental." Clara's hand hovered over the divorce papers she had quietly prepared over the past few weeks. Impulsive? She thought grimly. Standing up for herself after years of manipulation was hardly impulsive. "I see," she said slowly, her voice calm but firm. "Then I suppose this is goodbye, Alexander. For both our sakes." He frowned, clearly caught off guard. "Divorce?" he asked, though his voice betrayed curiosity rather than shock. "Yes, divorce." Clara stood, her posture commanding, her eyes meeting his without flinching. "I've waited long enough for fairness, for respect, for honesty. If you cannot provide that, then I will not remain bound by this marriage." Alexander leaned back in his chair, studying her as though he were trying to decipher a code he couldn't crack. Clara had never seen him like this, uncertain, restrained. "You're making a mistake," he said finally, his tone cool but carrying an undercurrent of tension. Clara shook her head. "No, Alexander. You've made the mistakes. I'm only reclaiming what's mine." Within the week, Clara had moved out of the grand Bennett estate. The mansion, once a symbol of wealth and power, now felt suffocating, a gilded cage. In her modest apartment, surrounded by boxes, she felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in years, the air seemed lighter, the space truly hers. She immediately focused on her independence. She took control of her finances, consulted lawyers to ensure her inheritance rights were secured, and began cultivating a life that belonged solely to her. Friends were surprised by her courage. "I don't know if I could have done that," said her best friend, Lila, over coffee. Clara smiled softly. "It wasn't easy. But staying would have cost me more than money. It would have cost me my dignity, my voice, my life." Weeks later, while unpacking her last box of personal belongings, Clara paused over an old photograph. It was her and Alexander on a vacation from years ago. Happy smiles, sunlit beaches, and laughter frozen in time. She traced the image with her finger, a pang of nostalgia hitting her. She shook her head. "No," she whispered. "That life is gone. I won't go back." Clara's phone buzzed with a notification. Alexander had sent a message, polite, formal, almost neutral. She ignored it. For the first time, she realized that silence could be a weapon, a shield. And in that moment, Clara Bennett felt something she hadn't in years: control over her own life. For the first time, she wasn't a passive participant in someone else's game. She was the player. As the city lights twinkled outside her window, Clara sipped her wine, reflecting on the path she had chosen. Divorce hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. And though she didn't yet know what the future held, she felt ready. Ready to fight for her inheritance, ready to define her own happiness, and ready to face whatever challenges came her way. For Clara Bennett, breaking free was just the beginning. Clara Bennett's mornings had transformed into a rhythm she hadn't experienced in years. No early calls from Alexander, no reminders of a marriage that had become suffocating. Instead, her days began with sunlight streaming through the apartment window, the aroma of fresh coffee, and the quiet satisfaction of choosing her own path. The first step toward reclaiming her independence had been the most daunting: establishing her legal rights to the Bennett inheritance. Clara had enlisted a trusted attorney who guided her through complex family dynamics and the intricate clauses of the estate. Every meeting, every document signed, felt like a small victory, a confirmation that she was capable of standing on her own. But independence wasn't only about money or legal victories. It was about life, about discovering who she was without Alexander shadowing every decision. Clara had started to explore passions she had neglected: a creative writing course, weekend hikes, and even volunteering at a local art gallery. The gallery became a haven. Surrounded by paintings, sculptures, and other people who expressed themselves freely, Clara found a sense of clarity. One afternoon, as she admired a vibrant landscape painting, she felt a tap on her shoulder. "Clara Bennett?" She turned to find a woman with a bright smile and friendly eyes. "Yes. I'm Lila," the woman said warmly. "I volunteer here. I've seen you around. Are you an artist?" Clara laughed softly. "Not really. I'm rediscovering myself, I suppose. But I love art. It feels alive, unlike the life I've been living." Lila nodded knowingly. "I understand completely. Sometimes we need a new canvas to paint our own stories." Clara smiled, feeling a flicker of excitement. Maybe this was what she needed, a life that was hers, vibrant and unpredictable. The weeks passed, and Clara's confidence grew. She found joy in the small victories, preparing her own meals, decorating her apartment, reconnecting with friends who had long been sidelined by her marriage, and even negotiating successfully with lawyers to secure her inheritance. She also discovered her own strength in moments of solitude. One rainy evening, she sat by the window with a cup of tea, the patter of rain soothing her thoughts. She thought about Alexander, his indifference, his manipulations, and the cold distance that had grown between them. And she realized she no longer felt the sharp sting of betrayal, only a quiet resolve. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "I hope you are well. We need to talk." Clara's heart skipped. She recognized the tone immediately. Alexander. She stared at the message for a long moment, weighing her options. Replying felt dangerous. Ignoring it felt safe. She chose safety. With a decisive tap, she deleted the message. Her independence, she reminded herself, was not negotiable. Despite her focus on work and self-growth, life had its own surprises. One afternoon, at a charity event organized by the gallery, Clara met someone who would subtly begin to change the rhythm of her heart. He was tall, with a gentle confidence, and an easy smile. He introduced himself as Julian, a philanthropist with a love for the arts. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, from favorite painters to travel stories, and Clara felt an unfamiliar warmth, curiosity, laughter, and intrigue that didn't feel threatening. By the end of the evening, Julian had offered to collaborate on a gallery project she was involved in. Clara agreed, though cautiously. She didn't want to rush into anything, especially not romance. But she couldn't deny the spark, subtle, respectful, and intriguing, that he had awakened. That night, back in her apartment, Clara reflected on her new life. Divorce had been painful, but it had also been a doorway to freedom, self-discovery, and unexpected opportunities. She realized that independence wasn't just about finances or legal rights. It was about reclaiming joy, passion, and the ability to make choices for herself. Her gaze drifted to the skyline outside her window. The city seemed larger, brighter, full of possibilities she hadn't noticed before. And for the first time in a long while, Clara Bennett felt genuinely hopeful. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. The next morning, she received another message. This one was from Julian. "Would you like to see the gallery this weekend? I'd love to get your input on a new exhibit." Clara smiled. She typed a brief, polite reply. "I'd love to. See you Saturday." As she set her phone down, a thought struck her. The world was no longer about Alexander, inheritance battles, or old betrayals. It was about Clara, her choices, her life, and the future she was determined to create. And for the first time, she felt completely, exhilaratingly free. Clara Bennett was reviewing contracts in her apartment when a soft knock at the door interrupted her concentration. She frowned. Visitors were rare, and she didn't recognize the number from the intercom. With cautious steps, she opened the door. Alexander stood there, impeccably dressed as always, a briefcase in hand, but there was something different in his expression, humility perhaps, or regret. "Alexander," she said, her voice calm but cold. "What are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you," he said, his tone unusually soft. "It's important." Clara studied him for a moment, noting the subtle shift in his demeanor. Gone was the arrogance, the condescending smile. "You've said a lot of things before. Why should I believe anything has changed?" Alexander's jaw tightened. "Because I have. I know I made mistakes. Serious ones. I tried to control things that weren't mine to control. I lost sight of what mattered, and I've spent the last few years realizing that. Clara felt a flicker of something she had worked hard to suppress. Old feelings, buried beneath anger and hurt. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. You lost sight of what mattered? She repeated. Do you know how much that cost me? My trust, my peace, my life as I knew it. Alexander nodded solemnly. I do. And I'm not here to justify myself. I'm here to ask if there's a way to make amends. Not to undo the past, but to show you I've changed. Clara felt a swirl of emotions. Anger, skepticism, and, against her better judgment, curiosity. He wasn't demanding forgiveness, but the very act of showing up unsettled her. I'm not sure there's anything you can do, she said carefully. I've built a life without you. A life I'm proud of. You can't just walk back in and expect things to be the same. I don't expect that, Alexander replied. I'm asking for a chance to show you I'm different. To prove that I'm no longer the man who betrayed you. Clara crossed her arms, keeping her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. Prove it then. Actions, not words. I'm done listening to apologies. I'm done being manipulated. Alexander's eyes softened. Understood. I'll respect whatever boundaries you set. But I hope you'll let me try, in whatever way you're comfortable with. Over the next few days, Clara's life felt unexpectedly tense. Alexander's presence, or the mere knowledge that he could appear at any time, kept her alert, cautious and oddly unsettled. She went about her routines, yet every phone buzz made her glance at the screen, half expecting a message from him. She confided in Lila one evening over coffee. He's changed, Clara admitted reluctantly. I can see it. But that doesn't erase the years of deceit, the betrayal, the humiliation. How do I even begin to trust him again? Lila leaned forward. Trust is earned, not demanded. You don't owe him anything. But maybe if he's sincere, you can let him prove himself, slowly. Only if it feels right to you. Clara nodded. The idea of testing him, observing his actions without giving herself fully away, seemed reasonable. She wasn't ready to forgive, but she could evaluate whether he had truly changed. Alexander began showing up in small, careful ways, leaving handwritten notes of apology and acknowledgement, respecting boundaries while demonstrating patience and humility. Clara observed silently, noting every gesture, every change in demeanor. One afternoon, he arrived at her apartment with a bouquet of her favorite flowers. She opened the door cautiously. Clara, he said gently, I won't stay long. I just wanted to show that I remember the little things, and that I'm serious about change. Clara studied him, her instincts urging her to push him away. Yet she saw sincerity in his eyes, a vulnerability she hadn't expected. Actions, not words, she reminded herself aloud. Alexander nodded. I understand. That's all I ask, a chance to show you, day by day, that I'm different. For the first time since their divorce, Clara felt a flicker of something familiar, cautious hope. But she reminded herself firmly. She was no longer the naive woman who had allowed herself to be manipulated. She would not give in easily, nor allow herself to be hurt again. That evening, Clara reflected on the encounter. Alexander had returned, but she remained in control. She could choose to watch, evaluate, and protect herself, or let her old feelings sweep her away. She poured herself a glass of wine, standing by the window as the city lights shimmered. I'm cautious, she whispered to herself. I've learned my worth. But perhaps he's capable of change. We'll see. And for the first time since he left, Clara didn't feel powerless. She was the one who held the cards now. In love, in life, and in the inheritance that had sparked her freedom. For Clara Bennett, the return of Alexander wasn't just a test of trust. It was a challenge to her independence, her judgment, and the possibility of love on her own terms. Clara Bennett paced her apartment, the afternoon sun streaming through the curtains. Alexander had just left after yet another visit, leaving behind a carefully wrapped gift, a leather-bound journal with a note. For the thoughts you've kept to yourself. I hope this reminds you I notice the little things. Clara held the journal, her fingers brushing the soft leather. She felt a mix of irritation and curiosity. Every gesture from Alexander seemed designed to test her resolve, to tempt her into a world she had deliberately walked away from. She placed the gift on the table, reminding herself, "Caution, Clara. Actions, not words." Alexander, meanwhile, seemed to relish the challenge. Every interaction was carefully orchestrated to demonstrate change. Small, thoughtful gestures that contrasted sharply with the arrogance he had displayed before. Yet Clara remained guarded, observing rather than succumbing. One evening, Alexander suggested attending a charity gala together, subtly framing it as a professional networking opportunity. Clara hesitated, weighing the risks. Attending could expose her to old emotions, but it also offered insight into his true intentions. "Clara, I promise, no pressure," he said, noticing her hesitation. "I simply want you to see that I can act with integrity, not for appearances, but because it's right." She studied him, noting the sincerity in his eyes. Finally, she agreed. "One evening," she said, "but only as a neutral observer. I'm not committing to anything else." At the gala, Alexander's transformation became more evident. He interacted politely with guests, showing genuine interest in causes rather than flaunting wealth or status. Clara couldn't deny that he had changed. The arrogance was gone, replaced by humility and attentiveness. Yet, the old tension lingered. She caught herself glancing at him, noting the ease with which he moved through the room, the warmth in his interactions. It was infuriating how effortlessly he had adapted, and how tempting it was to let her guard down. A colleague approached her. "I didn't expect to see Alexander here with you," she said with a raised eyebrow. "He seems different." Clara smiled tightly. "People can change. But I won't be the one to decide that. At least, not yet." After the gala, Alexander and Clara walked through a quiet garden nearby. The city lights glimmered in the distance, reflecting off a small fountain. "Clara," he said softly, "I know this is difficult, and I don't expect forgiveness overnight. But I want you to know that I'm serious, about change, about respecting you, about proving I can be different." Clara crossed her arms. "Actions speak louder than words, Alexander. This gala was impressive, but it doesn't erase the past. The mistakes you made had consequences." He nodded, his expression earnest. "I understand. That's why I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Not to win you back quickly, but to earn your trust." For a long moment, silence settled between them, filled only by the gentle trickle of the fountain. Clara felt a tug of old emotions, the memories of happier times mingling with the hurt that had driven her away. She reminded herself, she was in control. She would not be swept away by nostalgia or charm. Over the next few weeks, Alexander continued his careful campaign. Each visit was measured, a meaningful conversation, a small gesture, or an act of kindness. Clara observed and evaluated, testing the sincerity behind every action. One morning, she found herself unexpectedly smiling at a message he had sent. A simple note asking how her day was going, with no hidden motives or pressure. She realized it had been months since anyone had communicated with her so genuinely. Despite herself, she began to feel a warmth toward him. Not blind trust, but recognition of change. And yet, she refused to allow this warmth to cloud her judgment. She reminded herself constantly. She had choices. Freedom, revenge, or love. The decision would be hers alone. Then came the test she hadn't anticipated. Alexander invited her to a private family dinner. The first time he had included her in Bennett family affairs since the divorce. Clara hesitated. Accepting could expose her to emotional manipulation, yet declining might be perceived as indifference. She weighed the pros and cons carefully. Finally, she decided to attend, on her own terms. That evening, the Bennett mansion seemed both familiar and foreign. Family members greeted her politely, some with curiosity, others with restrained admiration. Alexander, however, met her gaze with something new: respect and patience, not entitlement or expectation. During dinner, he leaned slightly toward her and whispered, "Thank you for coming. No pressure, no expectations. Just you and me here in the present." Clara nodded subtly, acknowledging the effort without surrendering her independence. She realized she was beginning to see the possibility of reconciliation, not because she needed Alexander, but because she could now choose to consider it. As Clara returned to her apartment that night, she reflected on the delicate balance she had maintained, observing Alexander's changes without giving herself completely away, feeling attraction without surrendering control. She poured herself a glass of wine and sat by the window, looking out at the city skyline. I'm in control, she reminded herself. I have the power to decide whether to forgive, to embrace love, or to protect my independence. And for the first time in a long time, Clara felt a thrill, the thrill of choice, of testing the boundaries of temptation while staying true to herself. The game had begun, but she knew who held the cards. Clara Bennett sat in her apartment, reviewing a stack of documents when a soft knock at the door pulled her from concentration. She looked up to see Alexander standing there, holding a single white rose. His expression was serious, tinged with vulnerability. Clara, he began carefully, I need to tell you the truth, everything I should have told you years ago. Clara studied him, her instincts cautious but curious. Go on, she said, her voice steady. She had learned to command her emotions, to protect herself, yet there was a small part of her that still hoped he could prove himself worthy of trust. Alexander took a deep breath. The past, the way I treated you, it wasn't just selfishness. I was scared, of failure, of losing control of the family business, of disappointing my father. I let that fear make me cruel and manipulative. But in doing so, I hurt you more than I could ever justify. Clara's chest tightened. She had expected apologies, perhaps excuses, but not confession. Not the raw admission of vulnerability beneath the arrogance he had once worn like armor. You think that explains anything? She asked softly. You think telling me now can undo the years of betrayal? No, he admitted. I'm not asking you to forgive me immediately. I only want you to know that I've changed. I've spent these years learning what it means to truly value someone, to act with honesty and respect. I was wrong, Clara. And I'm sorry, deeply. Her mind whirled. Alexander's words stirred memories. Painful ones, yes, but also glimpses of a man she had once loved, before betrayal had defined their relationship. Could she trust that the man standing before her was truly different? Over the next few days, Clara grappled with conflicting emotions. She continued her independent work, expanding her legal and financial control over her inheritance, yet she also found herself observing Alexander's actions more keenly than ever. Every gesture, polite, patient, unassuming, was a test. She wanted to see if his words were reflected in his deeds. Then came a revelation that shocked her. One evening, as she reviewed old family documents, she discovered that Alexander had secretly acted to protect part of the inheritance she didn't even know existed. He had diverted funds, not for his gain, but to shield her from a risky investment scheme orchestrated by a distant relative. Clara stared at the papers, disbelief and confusion swirling inside her. Why didn't you tell me? She whispered aloud. I couldn't, he said softly, appearing beside her. At the time, you would have thought it was manipulation. I wanted to protect you without controlling you, and I see now that my methods failed. I should have trusted you with the truth. For the first time, Clara felt a complicated mix of anger and gratitude. He had hurt her, yes, but he had also saved her from financial ruin. The lines between betrayal and protection blurred, and she realized that her choice was no longer simple. Alexander's sincerity, combined with his actions, forced Clara to confront her heart. She recalled the months they had spent carefully testing each other, observing boundaries, and building trust anew. Slowly, she began to see the man he had become. Patient, thoughtful, and genuinely remorseful. Yet, Clara also knew she had grown. She was no longer the woman who would accept betrayal in silence. Her independence had become a core part of her identity, and any choice she made now would have to honor that self-respect. One evening, they sat together on her apartment balcony, overlooking the city lights. Alexander turned toward her, his eyes searching. Clara, he said quietly, I cannot change the past, but I can be here now. I can love you honestly, without manipulation or expectation. I can only ask for a chance to show you that I've truly changed. Clara took a deep breath, considering the weight of her choice. Love, revenge, independence? Each path held its own consequences and rewards. But after months of reflection, growth, and observing Alexander's transformation, she realized the decision wasn't about proving power or indulging old wounds. It was about choosing the life she truly wanted. She placed her hand over his. Alexander, I've seen your changes. I've seen your sincerity. And I've grown too. I won't let the past control me, but I also won't deny what I feel now. I choose to trust you, cautiously and on my terms. A weight seemed to lift from Alexander's shoulders. I'll honor that, Clara. Always. I promise. She smiled, feeling both relief and excitement. She had chosen love, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to, freely, consciously, and independently. In the following months, Clara and Alexander rebuilt their relationship carefully, each step guided by honesty and mutual respect. Clara continued to manage her inheritance and business ventures, her independence intact, while Alexander supported her as a partner, not a master. Through the trials of betrayal, testing, and revelation, Clara had discovered something more profound than revenge or submission. She had found the power to define her own happiness. And in choosing love, she had done so on her own terms, blending past lessons with present freedom. As the city skyline glittered outside her window, Clara leaned against Alexander, feeling a sense of fulfillment she had never thought possible. The journey had been difficult, but she had emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace the life she deserved, a life of love, independence, and self-respect. Clara Bennett had never felt more in control of her life. The months following Alexander's return had tested her patience, judgment, and heart, but they had also solidified her independence and self-respect. She had learned that true power wasn't about wealth or titles. It was about owning her choices, her voice, and her boundaries. The morning sun streamed into her apartment as Clara sat at her desk, reviewing the latest reports on her inheritance and business ventures. Her investments were thriving, her legal rights firmly secured, and for the first time, she felt a genuine sense of mastery over her life. Alexander entered quietly, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You're working hard as always," he observed with a soft smile. Clara looked up and returned the smile, a mix of warmth and confidence. "I have to. I've worked too hard to let anyone, even the past, derail me." He handed her a cup, their fingers brushing briefly. "And you're remarkable for it," he said sincerely. "I've watched you grow, and it's inspiring." Clara accepted the compliment with grace, aware that his praise no longer carried the weight of manipulation. She had earned her achievements, and Alexander had learned to recognize that. Later that week, Clara attended a family board meeting regarding the Bennett estate. For years, she had been sidelined, her opinions dismissed or ignored. But today, she walked into the room with poise and authority, ready to assert her position. "Good morning," she began, addressing the board members. "I've reviewed the estate reports and financial projections. I have recommendations that I believe will ensure the estate's prosperity while respecting my rights and the family's interests." The room fell silent. Clara could sense the surprise in their eyes. They hadn't expected her to command the discussion so confidently. She outlined her strategies clearly, balancing practicality with vision. By the end of the meeting, the board members nodded in agreement, impressed by her decisiveness. Alexander watched from the sidelines, pride in his gaze. She had always possessed intelligence and drive, but now she had harnessed it fully, independently. That evening, Clara and Alexander met privately. She shared the outcomes of the meeting, highlighting her accomplishments and the new direction she had set for the estate. "I'm proud of you," Alexander said quietly. "You've reclaimed everything: power, respect, independence. And yet, you still allow me to be part of your life. That's remarkable." Clara smiled, taking his hand. "I'm not here to let anyone, even you, diminish my autonomy. But I also know the value of partnership, when it's built on respect, honesty, and trust. That's what this is now. We've earned it carefully together." Alexander nodded, understanding. He had changed, but Clara had transformed too, stronger, wiser, and unafraid to claim what was rightfully hers. In the following weeks, Clara continued to expand her influence, taking on new projects and forming alliances that further secured her position. She also nurtured her relationship with Alexander, setting boundaries while allowing affection and trust to flourish naturally. One afternoon, she received a letter from a distant relative attempting to challenge her inheritance. Clara reviewed it calmly, then composed a detailed legal response with the assistance of her attorney. She submitted it confidently, knowing she now had the resources, knowledge, and authority to protect herself without fear. Later that evening, Alexander found her on the balcony, reviewing the city skyline. "You handled that beautifully," he said. "I couldn't be prouder." Clara set aside the papers. "It's not about pride. It's about control, my control. And I intend to keep it." Alexander stepped closer, resting a hand on her shoulder. I see a woman who's unstoppable. A woman who's finally living life on her terms. Clara leaned into him, a mix of satisfaction and contentment washing over her. She had faced betrayal, fought for independence, and reclaimed her power. And in doing so, she had discovered that love didn't require sacrifice of self. It could exist alongside autonomy, mutual respect, and trust. As night fell, Clara reflected on her journey. The divorce that had once felt like an ending had become the catalyst for her transformation. She had rebuilt her life, strengthened her identity, and learned that true power came from within. Alexander had returned, not as a master or manipulator, but as a partner willing to meet her as an equal. Clara realized that her happiness was no longer dictated by the past. It was defined by the choices she made now, every single day. With the city lights sparkling below, Clara felt a profound sense of peace. She had reclaimed her life, her voice, and her heart. And for the first time in years, she looked to the future with excitement, confidence, and the knowledge that she was unstoppable. The morning sunlight spilled across Clara Bennett's apartment, illuminating the city below. She sipped her coffee, savoring the warmth and clarity that came with a life she had fought so hard to reclaim. For years, her identity had been defined by betrayal, manipulation, and loss. But today, she felt the freedom to define herself on her own terms. Alexander entered quietly, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. His eyes met hers with a mixture of admiration and affection. "Good morning," he said softly. Clara smiled, the tension of past conflicts absent. "Good morning. Sleep well." "I did," he replied. "And I slept even better knowing that we're here. Together, on equal footing. No pretense, no expectations, just us." She set her cup down, studying him. For a long moment, she allowed herself to feel the fullness of their journey. The betrayal, the divorce, the years apart, and the slow, careful process of rebuilding trust. And she realized that what lay ahead was a choice. Love, independence, or a delicate balance of both. Weeks earlier, Clara had finalized her legal claims, secured her inheritance, and solidified her business ventures. She had emerged stronger, more confident, and completely self-reliant. Alexander's return had tested her patience and judgment, but he had consistently demonstrated change, humility, and respect for her boundaries. The city skyline seemed brighter than ever as Clara reflected on the transformation in both their lives. She no longer felt the fear and anger that had once consumed her. She had learned that forgiveness was not a surrender. It was a conscious choice made from strength. "Clara," Alexander said gently, breaking her thoughts. "I know you fought hard for your life, and I would never want to take that from you. But I also want you to know that I'm committed to being honest, patient, and present. I want to be part of your life. If you'll have me." Clara studied him carefully, feeling the sincerity in his eyes. She recalled the months of observing his actions, noting the subtle changes in his behavior, and testing his intentions. She realized that trust could be rebuilt, but it had to be done on her terms. With a calm, steady breath, she reached out and took his hand. "Alexander, I've seen your efforts, and I've seen the man you've become. I've also seen myself, strong, independent, and capable of making my own choices. I choose to let love in again, cautiously and consciously, knowing that I am still the author of my life." Alexander's eyes softened, and a small smile curved his lips. "That's all I could ever hope for," he said quietly. The days that followed were filled with a delicate balance of partnership and autonomy. Clara continued to manage her inheritance and business ventures, while Alexander supported her as an equal, not a master. They attended events together, made decisions collaboratively, and shared moments of quiet intimacy that were free from manipulation or expectation. One afternoon, Clara walked through the gardens of the Bennett estate, the place where her journey had begun years ago. She paused near the fountain, reflecting on how far she had come. The estate no longer felt like a gilded cage. It was a symbol of her resilience and strength. Alexander joined her, standing beside her in comfortable silence. "You've reclaimed so much," he said softly. "Not just the estate but yourself." Clara nodded. "It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. And now I'm ready, for love, for independence, for everything life has to offer." Alexander smiled, taking her hand. "Then let's walk forward together. Not as owner and spouse, or as master and dependent, but as partners, equals, supporting each other." Clara felt a profound sense of fulfillment. She had faced betrayal, navigated temptation, and tested both herself and Alexander. She had emerged stronger, wiser, and fully in control of her life. And now, she was ready to embrace love, not as a necessity, but as a choice. That evening, they hosted a small gathering at her apartment, inviting friends and colleagues who had witnessed Clara's journey. Laughter filled the rooms, toasts were made, and Clara felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had reclaimed not just material wealth, but the richness of autonomy, friendship, and trust. Later, as the city lights glittered outside, Clara and Alexander stood together on the balcony. The breeze was gentle, carrying the promise of new beginnings. "Here's to us," Alexander said softly. Clara leaned into him, feeling the strength of her independence merge with the warmth of rekindled love. "To us," she echoed, "and to the life we choose together and on our terms." For Clara Bennett, the story that had begun with betrayal and divorce had evolved into one of empowerment, conscious love, and a future filled with promise. She had reclaimed her power, tested the boundaries of forgiveness, and discovered that true love was most meaningful when it coexisted with self-respect. And as she watched the stars shimmer above the city, Clara knew this was only the beginning. A beginning she had chosen for herself, with courage, wisdom, and an open heart. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more original novel stories. And stay tuned, our next story is coming soon.